The Mitchell Estate ballroom shimmered under a canopy of crystal chandeliers, each prism catching the late afternoon sun and scattering it across 300 guests who had traveled from San Francisco, Seattle, and as far as Boston to witness Jennifer Mitchell marry Michael Thompson. The kind of wedding where the floral arrangements cost more than most people earned in a month, where every smile had been practiced in mirrors and every handshake carried the weight of future business deals. James Robinson stood just inside the arched entrance, his 6-year-old daughter Sophia's hand warm in his, and felt the room's collective gaze shift toward them, like a spotlight he hadn't asked for. He wore his Sunday suit, charcoal gray, purchased 4 years ago from a department store clearance rack, tailored by a woman in his building who charged $20 and always asked about Sophia's heart. The fabric held its shape well enough. The shoulders fit properly, and the shoes, polished that morning until Sophia said they looked like mirrors, were the same ones he wore to church and parent-teacher conferences. It was the best he owned. It would have to be enough. Sophia tugged at his hand, her gap-toothed smile faltering as she took in the scope of the venue. White marble floors stretched toward a raised platform where an officiant in formal robes waited beside an arch, wrapped in roses that must have been flown in from somewhere exotic. The chairs were gilded, the programs embossed. The air itself seemed perfumed with money and expectation. Her voice came out small. "Daddy, is this a castle?" Before he could answer, a woman in a champagne-colored gown swept past them, her perfume sharp enough to sting. She glanced at James, then at Sophia, and her expression shifted through a sequence he had learned to read over 38 years of living in his skin. Curiosity, assessment, dismissal. She moved on without acknowledgement, rejoining a cluster of guests near the champagne fountain who were already whispering behind raised programs. James felt Sophia's grip tighten. He squeezed back, gentle but firm, and leaned down until his mouth was level with her ear. "Not a castle, sweetheart. Just a place where people forgot that buildings don't matter as much as the people inside them." She considered this with the seriousness she brought to everything. Her dark eyes, so much like her mother's it sometimes hurt to look at her directly, studying the room as though filing away evidence for later review. Then she nodded, satisfied, and straightened her purple dress, the one she had insisted on wearing because purple was Mommy's favorite color, and even though Mommy was in heaven now, Sophia wanted her to see that they remembered. They moved deeper into the ballroom. James kept his spine straight, his shoulders back, his face neutral. He had learned in corporate meeting rooms and client presentations that posture communicated as much as words, that men who looked like him had to work twice as hard to occupy space without apology. He wasn't here to make anyone comfortable. He was here because Rebecca Mitchell had asked him to be, and his word meant something. Rebecca. The thought of her sent a flutter through his chest that he immediately suppressed. This wasn't the time. Not with 300 pairs of eyes tracking his movement, not with Sophia's hand in his, not with the weight of judgment pressing down from every corner of the room. He spotted their assigned seats in the 5th row, not the front, where family belonged, not even the 3rd row, where close friends might sit. The 5th row, far enough back to signal that while James Robinson and his daughter were tolerated, they were not quite welcome. The placement was deliberate. Everything in a room like this was deliberate. As they settled into their chairs, Sophia's legs swinging several inches above the floor, James caught sight of Rebecca near the front of the room. She stood beside her mother, Patricia Mitchell, a woman whose silver hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to lift her eyebrows into a permanent expression of mild surprise. Patricia's dress probably cost more than James's monthly rent. She was speaking to someone, her lips barely moving, her posture rigid with the kind of control that came from decades of being watched. Rebecca looked over her shoulder then, as though sensing his gaze, and their eyes met across the expanse of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. For just a moment, her carefully composed expression cracked. Relief flickered across her features, followed quickly by something that looked like apology. Then Patricia touched her arm, drawing her attention back to whatever conversation required the CEO of a billion-dollar real estate empire to nod politely at people she probably didn't respect. James looked away. He pulled out his phone to check the time, 4:47, then remembered that checking your phone at a wedding was probably some kind of etiquette violation he didn't know about. He put it away and focused instead on Sophia, who had produced a small notebook and a stub of purple crayon from her dress pocket. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" She didn't look up, her crayon moving in careful strokes across the page. "The lady with sad eyes." James followed her gaze to where Rebecca stood. From this distance, he couldn't make out her expression clearly, but Sophia had always been able to see things other people missed. The pediatric cardiologist who monitored her heart murmur had once commented that children with medical conditions often developed heightened emotional awareness, as though their body's vulnerability made them more attuned to the vulnerabilities of others. James didn't know if that was science or sentiment, but he knew his daughter saw the world differently than other 6-year-olds. The murmur of conversation around them shifted as guests began finding their seats. James recognized no one, which wasn't surprising given that his world and this world occupied different orbits. He worked as a financial analyst at a mid-sized firm in Portland, pulling together market reports and investment strategies for clients he never met. He made $87,000 a year before taxes, lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where the bus ran reliably, and budgeted carefully so that Sophia's medical expenses never forced him to choose between her health and their stability. He was good at his job, competent and careful, and he had built a life he was proud of even if it would never include crystal chandeliers or champagne fountains. The woman to his left leaned toward her companion, her voice pitched low but not low enough. "I heard Rebecca's brought someone. I saw him, the one with the little girl. Do we know who he is?" "Nobody seems to. Probably one of her charity cases. You know how she gets." James kept his eyes forward, his face neutral. Sophia's crayon paused and he felt her looking up at him, gauging whether he had heard, whether it mattered. He gave her a small smile and she returned to her drawing. The wedding coordinator, a harried-looking woman with a headset, moved through the room making final adjustments. She paused near James's row, counting heads, checking seating assignments against a tablet. Her eyes landed on him and Sophia, and for a moment confusion crossed her face as though she couldn't quite match what she was seeing with what her list told her should be there. Then she moved on, speaking urgently into her headset about timeline adjustments. Music began, not the traditional wedding march, but something orchestral and unfamiliar, probably commissioned specifically for this event. The guests rose as one, a choreographed movement that James joined half a beat too late. Sophia stood on her chair to see over the adults in front of her, and James steadied her with a hand on her back. Jennifer Mitchell appeared at the far end of the aisle, and even James had to admit she made a striking bride. Her dress was all intricate lace and strategic beading, her veil a cascade of silk that required 2 attendants to manage its train. She moved with the careful grace of someone who had practiced this walk, who understood that every step was being photographed from multiple angles, that this moment would be preserved and displayed and judged for years to come. She reached the altar where Michael Thompson waited. James had never met the man, knew nothing about him except what Rebecca had mentioned in passing during one of their Tuesday morning conversations at Moonbeam Cafe. Tech CEO, successful, well-connected, the kind of man who fit seamlessly into a ballroom like this, whose presence required no explanation or justification. The officiant began speaking, his voice amplified by discreet microphones hidden among the roses. James stopped listening to the words and focused instead on Sophia, who had finished her drawing and was now studying the ceremony with the intensity she usually reserved for nature documentaries. Her heart monitor, tucked discreetly beneath her dress and connected to a small device clipped to her waistband, registered normal rhythms. He checked it habitually every 15 minutes, a reflex developed over 6 years of managing a condition that was stable but required vigilance. The ceremony progressed through its scripted beats, readings selected for their poetic resonance rather than personal meaning. Musical interludes performed by a string quartet positioned just out of sight. Jennifer and Michael exchanged vows they had written themselves but which somehow sounded like every other personalized vow James had ever heard. Promises of partnership and patience, metaphors about journeys and seasons, declarations of love that were probably sincere but felt diminished by their performance before an audience of hundreds. Then the officiant reached the part about objections, that vestigial element of wedding ceremonies that no one expected to be invoked, and the room settled into the particular silence of people waiting for a formality to pass. Except Michael Thompson wasn't looking at his bride. His eyes had drifted over Jennifer's shoulder, scanning the assembled guests with the restless attention of someone accustomed to working rooms, to identifying opportunities and connections in every gathering. His gaze moved across the front rows, past his own family and Jennifer's inner circle, tracking further back through the less important guests seated in the middle distance. And then his eyes locked onto James. The change in Michael's expression was immediate and total. Color drained from his face as though someone had opened a valve. His mouth, which had been curved in the slight smile of a groom about to kiss his bride, went slack. His hands, which had been holding Jennifer's, dropped to his sides. Jennifer noticed first. Her voice came out uncertain, confused. "Michael?" But Michael Thompson was already moving. He released Jennifer's hands, stepped back from the altar, and descended the 3 shallow stairs that separated the wedding party from the guests. The officiant stopped mid-sentence, his carefully modulated voice trailing off into bewildered silence. The string quartet held their bows suspended above their instruments. 300 guests held their collective breath as Michael Thompson walked past the front row, past his parents and Jennifer's mother, past the carefully arranged flowers and the photographer who scrambled to capture whatever was happening. He walked with purpose down the center aisle, his eyes never leaving James until he reached the 5th row. And then Michael Thompson, CEO of Thompson Technologies, groom of the hour, dropped to one knee in front of James Robinson. The word came out quiet but clear, cutting through the crystalline silence of the ballroom. "Sir." James felt Sophia's hand tighten in his, felt the weight of 300 stares converge on him like heat from a magnifying glass, felt his heart hammering against his ribs even as his face remained carefully neutral. Michael's voice shook. "Mr. Robinson, I never thought I'd see you again. I never got the chance to thank you properly." From somewhere near the front of the room, Patricia Mitchell's voice rose in sharp confusion. "Michael, what are you doing?" But Michael wasn't listening to her. He was looking at James with an expression that mixed gratitude and something close to reverence, and when he spoke again, his voice carried across the silent ballroom. 5 years ago, Thompson Technologies was 60 days from bankruptcy. Every consultant we hired told us to liquidate. Every investor we approached walked away. The banks wouldn't touch us. We were done." He paused, drawing a breath that seemed to steady him. This man, working as a junior analyst at Morgan Cross Financial, spent his own time, weekends, evenings, hours he should have been with his family, putting together a 47-page strategic analysis of our company. He sent it to me unsolicited. No payment requested, no job application attached, just the most brilliant piece of financial strategy I'd ever seen. James felt his throat tighten. He had forgotten about that report, or rather, he had filed it away in the category of things done because they were right, not because they expected reward. Michael Thompson's company had been bleeding talented people, good engineers and designers who couldn't afford to wait for paychecks that might never come. James had seen the news coverage, had recognized the underlying issues from his work with similar firms, and had spent 3 weekends building a restructuring plan that addressed both the immediate cash flow crisis and the longer-term market positioning problems. He had sent it because watching people lose their jobs when there was a fixable solution seemed like a waste. Michael was still talking, his voice growing stronger. I called Mr. Robinson immediately, offered him a vice president position, equity stake, everything I could think of to bring someone that talented into the company. He turned me down, said he had done it to help, not to leverage it into opportunity. He told me to implement the plan and wished me luck. Around them, phones had appeared in hands. James could see the screens glowing, recording, capturing this moment for immediate broadcast to networks he didn't belong to. The woman who had called him a charity case 2 rows over had her hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide. We implemented every recommendation in that report. Within 18 months, we were profitable. Within 3 years, we had secured contracts that grew the company to 500 employees and revenue that let us expand into 4 new markets. Last year, Thomson Technologies was acquired for $500 million. Michael's voice cracked. None of that happens without Mr. Robinson, none of it. 200 people have jobs because of his brilliance and his generosity. My wife, he glanced back at Jennifer, who stood frozen at the altar, her bouquet hanging limp in her hands. I met her at a tech conference that I could only attend because the company still existed. My life, all of this, exists because this man saw people struggling and decided to help. The silence that followed felt different now, heavier. James could feel the calculation happening in 300 minds simultaneously, the reassessment of who he was and what his presence meant. The whispers would start soon, the speculation about his net worth and connections and influence. The very thing he had spent 5 years trying to avoid after Sarah died, after he had realized that success in the corporate world meant less time with Sophia, meant missing medical appointments and bedtime stories, meant becoming the kind of father he didn't want to be. He had walked away from opportunities like the one Michael Thompson had offered, had taken a lateral move to a position with less prestige but better hours, had built a life where Sophia came first and work existed to fund that life rather than define it. He had dignity. He had his daughter. He had learned that those things mattered more than titles or recognition or the kind of wealth that bought crystal chandeliers. But now Michael Thompson was kneeling in front of him at a wedding attended by people who measured worth in zeros and connections. And there was no way to put this moment back in the box where it belonged. James helped Michael stand, his movements economical and sure. You owed me nothing. You did the hard work. You built the company. Michael shook his head. I owed you everything, and I should have found a way to thank you before now. Then Michael turned to address the room, his voice carrying the practiced projection of someone accustomed to keynote speeches. This is James Robinson. Some of you have probably heard his name if you move in the right circles. He's the financial strategist who has quietly saved 6 companies in the Pacific Northwest over the past decade. He does it without fanfare, without asking for equity or positions or even acknowledgement. He does it because he sees problems and knows how to fix them. James felt a presence materialize beside him and looked over to find a man in an expensive suit, late 40s, with the particular smugness of someone who had never been told no. The man's eyes held calculation rather than curiosity. Mr. Robinson, Stephen Harris, I'm on the board at Mitchell Enterprises. He extended a business card. I'd love to talk to you about some consulting opportunities. Perhaps we could arrange. But James's attention had shifted to Rebecca, who had turned fully around in the front row and was looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. Not surprise exactly. Something more complicated. Something that looked like hurt layered beneath resignation. Stephen Harris was still talking, but James spoke over him, his voice low and directed at Sophia. Come on, sweetheart, let's step outside for a minute. He moved toward the side exit, Sophia's hand in his, aware that every eye in the ballroom tracked his departure. Behind him, he could hear the ceremony coordinator trying to salvage the moment, suggesting that perhaps they should continue with the vows. that this had been a lovely interlude, but there was still a wedding to complete. The hallway outside the ballroom was mercifully empty. James found a bench beneath a window that overlooked the estate's gardens and sat down, pulling Sophia onto his lap. Her heart monitor beeped its steady rhythm, normal and reassuring. She looked up at him, her expression serious. "That man said you saved his company. I wrote him a report. He did the saving. But you helped." "I helped." She processed this, her small hands playing with the buttons on his suit jacket. "Is that why the people were staring at us?" James felt something crack in his chest. He had brought Sophia here knowing there would be judgment, knowing that rooms like this one had particular ideas about who belonged and who didn't. But he had underestimated how visible they would be, how much scrutiny would fall on a black man in a department store suite accompanied by a 6-year-old in a purple dress she had picked out herself because it reminded her of her dead mother. Some people were staring because they were being rude. Some people were staring because they were surprised. And some people were staring because they realized they had made wrong assumptions about who we are. Sophia nodded slowly, then reached into her pocket and pulled out the drawing she had made during the ceremony. She held it up for him to see, the lady with sad eyes. Except now the drawing had changed. Rebecca stood in the center of the page, but Sophia had added 2 figures beside her, a tall man and a small girl, both rendered in purple crayon, both smiling. The 3 figures held hands. "I think she's less sad now," Sophia said, "because we're here." Before James could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway. He looked up to find Rebecca walking toward them, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She had left the ballroom, left her mother and sister and the ceremony that was presumably still trying to recover from Michael Thompson's unexpected confession. She stopped a few feet away, her arms crossed over her chest in a posture that looked defensive. Her voice came out tight. "You knew. When we met at Moonbeam, when I told you about my family, about the business, you already knew who I was." It wasn't a question, but James answered anyway. "I researched your family 2 days after you invited me to the wedding. Wanted to understand what I was walking into. And you didn't think to mention that you're apparently some kind of financial genius that people kneel for at weddings? I'm an analyst who occasionally helps companies in trouble. That's not the same thing." Rebecca's laugh held no humor. "Michael Thompson just told 300 people, including every major business leader in the Pacific Northwest, that you saved his company. Do you have any idea what that means? What they'll think? What they'll assume about why you're here?" James stood carefully, settling Sophia on the bench beside him before facing Rebecca fully. He kept his voice level, his words precise. "I came here because you asked me to. Because after 8 weeks of Tuesday and Thursday mornings at a cafe where we didn't have to be anyone except 2 people trying to find quiet in a loud world, you trusted me enough to ask. I wore my best suit because it's the best I own and it's good enough. I brought my daughter because you said to bring her and because I don't hide her from the world just because the world sometimes doesn't know what to do with a black man raising a child with a heart condition." He took a breath, feeling the words gather weight. "I have dignity. I deserve respect. Those aren't negotiable. If Michael Thompson's gratitude makes people think I'm here for some other reason, that says more about them than it does about me." Rebecca's expression shifted, something in her armor cracking. She looked at Sophia, who was watching them both with those 2 knowing eyes. "I didn't mean, I wasn't suggesting." "Yes, you were. You were suggesting that now that people know I'm capable, now that they're reassessing their assumptions, I might be here for the wrong reasons. You were suggesting that my presence needs explanation beyond Rebecca asked me to come." The words hit their target. Rebecca flinched, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost its edge. "You're right. I'm sorry, this is complicated." "It doesn't have to be. My mother is going to ask questions. My sister is probably furious that her wedding just got derailed. Stephen Harris already tried to corner you for consulting work, and he won't be the last. Everyone in that room is recalculating who you are and what you're worth and why you're here with me." James picked up Sophia, settling her on his hip even though she was getting too big for it, even though his back would remind him later that 6-year-olds were heavier than they looked. But he needed the grounding weight of her, needed the reminder of what actually mattered. "Then let them recalculate. I know why I'm here. You know why I'm here. Sophia knows why we're here. Everyone else's calculations are their problem." Sophia reached out toward Rebecca, holding up the drawing. "I made this for you, so you remember." Rebecca took the paper with hands that trembled slightly. She studied the 3 purple figures, and something in her face softened completely. "You drew us together. Because you're less sad when we're here. Daddy says people need other people even when they think they don't." Rebecca's eyes were wet when she looked back at James. "Your daughter is wise. She has her mother's gift for seeing what others miss." The mention of Sarah hung in the air between them. James had told Rebecca about his late wife during their 4th week at Moonbeam, had shared the basic facts without dwelling on the grief that still caught him off guard sometimes. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed too late, 18 months from symptoms to funeral. He had been 35 years old, Sophia had been 3, and the world had narrowed down to hospital rooms and insurance paperwork and figuring out how to explain to a child why mommy wasn't coming home. Rebecca had listened without offering platitudes, had simply said that she was sorry, that she couldn't imagine that Sophia was lucky to have him. It was the first time in 2 years that someone had responded to his widowhood without either treating him like a tragic figure or assuming he was looking for a replacement wife. Now Rebecca reached out and touched Sophia's cheek, a gesture so gentle it made James's throat tighten. "Thank you for the drawing. I'll keep it somewhere safe." A door opened at the far end of the hallway and Patricia Mitchell emerged, her expression tight with controlled fury. She spotted them and strode forward, her heels striking the marble like warning shots. "Rebecca, the ceremony is waiting. Jennifer is devastated. We need to—" She stopped when she saw James, and her expression shifted into something colder. "Mr. Robinson, how convenient that your past good deed happened to surface at my daughter's wedding." James set Sophia down gently, positioning himself between his daughter and Patricia's anger. "Mrs. Mitchell, I apologize for the disruption. That wasn't my intention." "No, I'm sure your intention was simply to attend quietly and let my daughter parade you around like some kind of trophy. A successful black professional to demonstrate how progressive and open-minded she is." The words landed like slaps. James felt Rebecca stiffen beside him, heard her sharp intake of breath that preceded an objection. But he held up a hand, his voice steady. "Your daughter didn't parade me anywhere. She asked me to accompany her because we've spent the last 2 months building a friendship based on honesty and respect. If you're uncomfortable with my presence, that discomfort belongs to you." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "I've built a $2 billion empire by reading people and situations accurately. I know exactly what this looks like." "Then you know it looks like a woman who found someone she enjoys spending time with and invited him to a family event. If you're seeing something else, that's your interpretation. You expect me to believe you're not here because Rebecca is wealthy and connected?" James pulled out his wallet and extracted a small card, his driver's license. He handed it to Patricia. "My address is public record. Feel free to drive by my apartment building. It's in a neighborhood where we worry about bus routes and grocery store prices. My car is a 12-year-old sedan that I bought used and maintain myself. My daughter and I budget carefully so her medical expenses don't force us into debt. I make a good living as an analyst, but I'm not wealthy, and I've never pretended to be." He took the license back. "I'm here because your daughter asked, because I said yes, because my word means something. If those reasons aren't sufficient, then we should leave now, and you can explain to Rebecca why her guest wasn't welcome." Patricia's mouth opened, closed. For perhaps the first time in decades, she seemed uncertain how to proceed. Behind her, Stephen Harris appeared, his earlier obsequiousness replaced with something sharper. "Patricia, might I have a word? About our friend Mr. Robinson here." James felt Sophia's hand slip into his. Her heart monitor beeped, the rhythm slightly elevated. He glanced down and saw her face had gone pale. The stress was affecting her. "Excuse me, Sophia needs some air." He led his daughter past Patricia and Stephen, past Rebecca, who looked torn between following and staying, past the whole complicated mess of assumptions and calculations and social maneuvering that he had hoped to avoid. They walked through the estate's halls until they found a side door that opened onto a garden. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of roses and jasmine. Sophia's breathing evened out almost immediately, her color returning. James sat on a stone bench and pulled her onto his lap, checking her monitor. The elevated rhythm was already settling back to normal. "I'm okay, Daddy." "I know, sweetheart, but let's sit for a minute anyway." They sat in the gathering dusk, listening to crickets begin their evening song. Through the garden's entrance, James could see light spilling from the ballroom windows. The ceremony had presumably continued. Jennifer and Michael were probably married by now. The disruption smoothed over, the guests settling in for reception, dinner, and dancing, and the careful networking that constituted the real business of events like this. Sophia rested her head against his chest. "Are we going home? Do you want to go home?" She was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "Miss Rebecca looked sad again, after her mommy was mean to you." "Her mother wasn't mean, just protective. Mommy used to say that mean and protective look the same sometimes. You have to check which one someone is really being." James smiled despite himself. Sarah had said exactly that, usually when explaining why she had to confront people whose behavior hurt others even when they claimed good intentions. She had been a social worker, had spent her days navigating systems designed to help people, but which often ended up harming them through indifference or incompetence. She had taught Sophia, in the 3 years they had together, that kindness required attention, and that protection without respect was just another form of control. "You're right. We should check which one Mrs. Mitchell was being." "Can we check tomorrow? I'm tired." James was about to agree when footsteps crunched on the gravel path. Rebecca appeared, having somehow navigated the gardens in heels that were utterly impractical for anything except standing still and looking elegant. She had Sophia's drawing clutched in one hand. "I'm sorry about my mother." James waited. "She's protective of the family, of the business. She's spent 40 years building something substantial, and she's terrified of anything that might threaten it." "I'm not a threat to your family's business. I know that, but she doesn't, and she won't until she decides you're trustworthy, which could take time. Time we might not have if this is how the evening started." Rebecca sat on the bench beside them, close enough that her shoulder brushed James's. Sophia looked up at her with those assessing eyes. "Are you going to be sad again?" "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe. Daddy says being sad is okay, but staying sad when you could choose different is giving up." Rebecca glanced at James, something like wonder in her expression. "Your daddy is very wise. Daddy says I'm wise too, because I notice things." "What do you notice right now?" Sophia pointed at the drawing in Rebecca's hand. "You didn't put it somewhere safe yet. You're still holding it. That means it matters." Rebecca looked down at the paper, at the 3 purple figures holding hands, and her eyes filled with tears that she blinked back quickly. "It does matter. Very much." Inside, dinner was presumably being served. The reception would continue for hours, dancing and toasts and all the performative joy that weddings required. James had no interest in returning and spending the evening fielding questions about his work or deflecting consulting offers or watching Sophia grow more exhausted as the night wore on. But Rebecca was sitting beside him, holding his daughter's drawing like it was valuable, and he realized that leaving now would be the easier choice but not necessarily the right one. He had told Rebecca he would be here. He had given his word, and while Michael Thompson's revelation had complicated everything, it hadn't changed the fundamental fact that he was a man who kept his promises. "We should go back inside," he said quietly. "If only so Jennifer doesn't spend her wedding reception wondering if she inadvertently drove us away." Rebecca nodded, standing and offering her hand to Sophia. "Will you sit with me during dinner? Both of you?" Sophia looked to James for guidance. He considered the question, considered what it would mean to move from the fifth row to wherever Rebecca was seated. Considered the message it would send to Patricia and Stephen and all the other people who were busy recalculating his worth. Then he thought about the woman who had walked into Moonbeam Cafe 8 weeks ago looking exhausted and lonely, who had spent Tuesday and Thursday mornings building a friendship that asked nothing except honest presence. That woman had invited him here. That woman deserved the answer she had asked for. "Yes, we'll sit with you." They walked back through the gardens as the last light faded from the sky, 3 figures moving together toward the ballroom's glowing windows, toward complications neither James nor Rebecca had fully anticipated, but which they would navigate together or not at all. The reception hall glittered with the same excessive elegance as the ceremony space. But now guests had shed their reverent silence for the kind of controlled chaos that accompanied open bars and assigned seating. James walked through the crowd with Sophia's hand in his, and Rebecca beside them, acutely aware of how conversations paused mid-sentence as they passed, how eyes tracked their movement with renewed interest now that Michael Thompson's confession had rewritten the evening's social calculus. Rebecca had been seated at table 2, reserved for immediate family and the wedding party's closest companions. Her place card rested between her mother's and an empty chair that had presumably been intended for whatever suitable bachelor Patricia had hoped to engineer into her daughter's orbit. Now Rebecca gathered both cards and crossed the room to where James and Sophia's seats waited in the 5th row equivalent of reception seating. Table 14 tucked near the kitchen doors where the catering staff moved in constant, efficient chaos. She plucked their cards from the table and ignored the startled looks from the other assigned guests. "You're sitting with me." James watched her march back toward table 2, her spine straight and her jaw set in a way that suggested she was done negotiating her own choices. He followed, Sophia bouncing slightly with each step, her earlier fatigue momentarily forgotten in the novelty of watching adults break unspoken rules. Patricia Mitchell had already claimed her seat at table 2 when they arrived. She looked up from her conversation with an older gentleman whose name tag identified him as a state senator, and her expression went through several rapid transformations before settling on brittle politeness. "Rebecca, dear, I don't think there are enough chairs," but Rebecca was already flagging down a server, requesting 2 additional place settings, rearranging the table's careful symmetry to accommodate the guests she had chosen. The senator excused himself with practiced diplomacy, leaving Patricia alone to witness her daughter's quiet rebellion. Jennifer appeared then, having changed from her elaborate ceremony gown into something slightly less architectural for the reception. She looked exhausted beneath her makeup, her smile strained. "Rebecca, can we talk? Privately?" They moved a few feet away, but James could still hear Jennifer's urgent whisper. "Mother is furious. She thinks you're trying to make some kind of statement by having your guests sit at the family table. His name is James. His daughter is Sophia. And I'm not making a statement. I'm having dinner with people I actually want to spend time with. On my wedding day." Rebecca's voice softened. "Jen, I'm sorry about the disruption. Michael's revelation wasn't planned, but I'm not going to apologize for who I brought or where we're sitting." Jennifer glanced over at James, her assessment quick and calculating in a way that reminded him uncomfortably of her mother. "He saved Michael's company. That's what everyone's talking about. Not the ceremony, not the vows, just how the groom abandoned me at the altar to kneel for your date." Michael didn't abandon you. He took 60 seconds to acknowledge someone who changed his life. That's not the same thing. You don't understand what it's like to have your moment overshadowed. You're right, I don't. But I do understand what it's like to feel suffocated by expectations and judgments. So I'm choosing to sit where I want with who I want. You should do the same. Jennifer's eyes welled up. Though whether from frustration or genuine hurt, James couldn't tell. She blinked rapidly, preserving her makeup, and walked away without another word. Rebecca returned to the table and sat down beside James with enough force to rattle the wine glasses. Dinner arrived in waves: lobster bisque, Caesar salad constructed tableside with theatrical flourishes, duck confit that Sophia eyed suspiciously before whispering to James that she would rather have chicken nuggets. He cut his own duck into small pieces and traded plates with her, watching her face light up as she discovered that duck, when properly disguised, tasted better than she had feared. Patricia maintained a running conversation with the remaining guests at their table, pointedly directing her comments to everyone except James. She asked about businesses and vacation homes and mutual acquaintances, weaving a social net that excluded him through careful omission rather than overt rudeness. Stephen Harris materialized halfway through the main course, pulling up a chair that hadn't been requested. He inserted himself between James and an elderly woman who had been describing her recent Mediterranean cruise. "Mr. Robinson, I hope you don't mind if I join you for a moment. I wanted to discuss something that might interest you." James set down his fork, his patience wearing thin. "I'm here for a wedding, Mr. Harris, not a business meeting." Of course, but opportunities don't always arrive on convenient schedules." He leaned in, his voice dropping to what he probably imagined was a conspiratorial tone. "Mitchell Enterprises is expanding into new markets. We could use someone with your analytical capabilities. The compensation would be substantial. Equity options, full benefits, corner office if you want it." "I have a job." "I'm sure you do. But let's be honest about the difference between a mid-tier analyst position and what I'm offering. This is the kind of opportunity that changes lives." James picked up his fork again, cutting into the duck Sophia had rejected. "My life doesn't need changing, it needs protecting, and I protect it by being very selective about what opportunities I accept and why." Stephen's smile hardened into something less friendly. "You're here with Rebecca Mitchell, daughter of the CEO. That suggests you're at least somewhat interested in upward mobility." The implication hung in the air, crude and unmistakable. James felt Rebecca go rigid beside him, saw Sophia look up from her dinner with worried eyes. He set his fork down again, very deliberately, and turned to face Stephen fully. "I'm here because I was invited. My presence has nothing to do with business or advancement or whatever narrative you're constructing to make sense of what you don't understand." He paused, letting the words settle. "Intent doesn't erase impact, Mr. Harris. You just implied that a black man couldn't possibly be here simply because someone wanted his company. That he must have ulterior motives. That says more about your worldview than it does about mine." Stephen's face flushed. "I didn't mean, I wasn't suggesting—" "Yes, you were. But I'm going to finish my dinner now with my daughter and my friend. You should return to your own table." For a moment, Stephen looked like he might argue. Then Patricia Mitchell's voice cut through the tension, cool and precise. "Stephen, I believe they're serving dessert at table 7. You wouldn't want to miss it." It was a dismissal delivered with enough authority that Stephen had no choice but to comply. He stood, straightened his jacket, and walked away with as much dignity as he could salvage. Patricia watched him go, then turned her attention to James. "That was well handled. Thank you. Don't mistake my observation for approval. I still don't know what you're doing here or what you want from my daughter. But at least you're not tolerating fools." "I don't tolerate them because I can't afford to. Men who look like me don't get the luxury of letting insults slide." Patricia's expression shifted, something that might have been respect flickering across her features before being suppressed. My late husband used to say something similar. He built this company from a carpentry apprenticeship, started at 16, worked his way up through trades that didn't particularly welcome him because his father had been a union organizer and the contractors held grudges. He understood about not tolerating fools. It was the first personal detail Patricia had offered, the first suggestion that beneath her armor existed a human being who had loved someone and lost them. James softened slightly. How long has he been gone? 5 years this October. Heart attack while volunteering at a Habitat for Humanity build. He was helping frame a house for a family displaced by foreclosure. Died doing exactly the kind of work that mattered to him. Rebecca reached across the table and touched her mother's hand, a gesture so unexpected that Patricia startled. You never talk about him. Talking about him makes his absence real in a way I'm not prepared to accept. The admission hung there, raw and undefended. Then Patricia withdrew her hand and straightened her shoulders, reassembling her composure like armor being buckled back into place. But this isn't the time for maudlin reflection. Jennifer's wedding should be focused on celebration. Except Jennifer's wedding had become something else entirely. Guests circulated between tables ostensibly to congratulate the bride and groom, but James noticed how many of them engineered routes that brought them past table 2. They wanted to see him up close, this mystery man who had saved companies and turned down vice president positions. They wanted to assess whether he belonged at the family table or whether Rebecca had made some kind of misguided charitable gesture. Michael Thompson approached during dessert, his new wife beside him. Jennifer's smile looked more genuine now, though exhaustion had settled into the corners of her eyes. Mr. Robinson, I owe you an apology for derailing the ceremony. You don't owe me anything. I owe you honesty. And the honest truth is that seeing you here after all these years of wanting to thank you properly, I couldn't stay silent, even if the timing was terrible. Jennifer placed a hand on her husband's arm. The timing was perfect, actually. It reminded everyone that this wedding isn't just about celebration. It's about building something together. And sometimes that requires acknowledging the people who helped you get here. She looked at James directly. I'm sorry if my family made you feel unwelcome. That wasn't my intention when Rebecca said she was bringing someone. Your family is protective, that's understandable. Protective and judgmental aren't the same thing, but I'm working on helping them see the difference. They moved on to other tables and James watched them go with a strange mixture of relief and sadness. They seemed genuinely happy, these two people who had found each other through professional networks and shared ambitions. He wondered if they understood how rare that was, how many people spent entire lives searching for connection and finding only transaction. Sophia had fallen asleep against his shoulder, her breathing deep and even, her heart monitor emitting its steady rhythm. He adjusted her carefully, supporting her weight without disturbing her rest. Rebecca watched them with an expression he couldn't decipher. She's comfortable with you. She's my daughter. Comfortable is the baseline. I meant comfortable enough to sleep in a room full of strangers at an event that's probably overwhelming. That suggests you've built a foundation of safety for her. That's what fathers do. Not all of them. Rebecca's voice carried weight from experiences she hadn't shared. Some fathers are present but not safe. Some are loving but unreliable. You're both. James felt the compliment land somewhere deep, in the place where he stored his fears about whether he was enough for Sophia, whether raising her alone meant she was missing something essential. Her mother was the exceptional parent. I'm just trying not to mess up what Sarah started. Stop diminishing yourself. You're raising a wise, kind, emotionally intelligent child while managing her medical needs and working full-time. That's not just trying. That's succeeding. Before he could respond, Patricia stood and tapped her water glass with a knife, the crystal ring cutting through the ambient noise. The reception hall quieted as 300 guests turned their attention to the matriarch. I want to thank everyone for joining us to celebrate Jennifer and Michael's marriage. For those who don't know me, I'm Patricia Mitchell, mother of the bride and CEO of Mitchell Enterprises. My late husband Thomas always said that weddings were about more than the joining of two people. They were about the expansion of family, the building of new connections, the recognition that we are all strengthened by the communities we create. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room before landing deliberately on James. Tonight's ceremony included an unexpected moment that reminded me of something Thomas valued deeply: the importance of acknowledging those who help us, even when that help comes from unexpected sources. Michael Thompson's public gratitude toward Mr. James Robinson demonstrated the kind of character my late husband admired: the willingness to recognize excellence regardless of whether it arrives in familiar packaging. James felt the room's attention converge on him again, felt Rebecca tense beside him, felt Sophia stir slightly against his shoulder before settling back into sleep. "Mr. Robinson, my daughter tells me you're an analyst who occasionally helps struggling companies find their footing. That's admirable work, the kind of work that builds strong communities and preserves livelihoods. I misjudged you earlier this evening, and I apologize for that publicly, as the misjudgment was public." The apology landed like a stone thrown into still water, ripples spreading outward through the assembled guests. Stephen Harris looked like he had swallowed something bitter. Several board members exchanged glances weighted with calculation. Jennifer smiled, genuine warmth breaking through her fatigue. Patricia raised her glass. "To Jennifer and Michael, to new beginnings, to expanded families, and to the recognition that character matters more than pedigree." The toast was drunk by 300 guests, and in the clinking of crystal, James heard both absolution and complication. Patricia had offered public validation, which meant his presence was now sanctioned by the family matriarch. But it also meant expectations, assumptions, a framework being built around him without his consent. Rebecca leaned close, her voice barely audible. "Are you okay?" "I don't know yet. Ask me when we're not being watched by hundreds of people." The reception continued through dancing and cake cutting and all the ritual performances that wealthy weddings required. James excused himself as soon as politeness allowed, carrying Sophia through the halls to a quiet sitting room he had noticed earlier. She woke briefly as he settled her on a couch, her eyes unfocused with sleep. "Are we going home now, Daddy?" "Soon, sweetheart. Rest a little more." She curled into the cushions, and James stood at the window watching the estate's grounds fade into darkness. Behind him, the door opened and Rebecca entered, closing it carefully behind her. "You left without saying goodbye. I needed air, needed distance from everyone recalculating my worth based on your mother's toast. She meant well. I'm sure she did, but her meaning well doesn't change the fact that I'm now someone who needs to be explained and justified. Your mother's apology told 300 people that I have value because I saved a company and turned down opportunities. Not because I'm a decent human being who keeps his promises. The value is conditional, based on what I can do rather than who I am." Rebecca moved to stand beside him, their reflections ghostly in the darkened window. "You're right, and I'm sorry. You're not responsible for how others perceive me. But I am responsible for bringing you into a situation where you'd be subjected to that perception. I knew my family would judge. I knew the guests would scrutinize. I asked you to come anyway because I was tired of facing these events alone, and that was selfish." James turned to face her, studying the woman who had walked into Moonbeam Cafe 8 weeks ago looking for the same thing he was, a place to exist without performance. "Do you regret asking me?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to fully examine. Rebecca took her time answering, her hands clasped in front of her like she was physically holding herself together. "No, But I regret not preparing you better for what you'd face. I regret not standing up to my mother immediately when she was rude. I regret Stephen Harris and his insulting implications. I regret that your daughter had to hear people making assumptions about why you're here. Sophia understands more than you think. She's been navigating assumptions about us her entire life. Black father, biracial daughter, medical condition that requires visible monitoring equipment. We're used to being underestimated and second-guessed. That doesn't make it right. No, but it makes it familiar. And familiar is easier than surprising. Rebecca moved closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume mixed with the champagne she had been drinking. I don't want this to be an act anymore. The statement landed with unexpected force. James felt his pulse quicken, felt the careful distance he had been maintaining begin to collapse. What do you want it to be? Real, messy, honest, all the things I've been avoiding for 8 years because avoiding felt safer than risking. Risking what? Risking that you'd want me for the wrong reasons. Risking that I'd want you for the wrong reasons. Risking that we'd build something that looked real but was actually just two lonely people pretending connection was the same as intimacy. James reached out and took her hand, his fingers dark against her pale skin. The contrast stark and somehow significant. I don't pretend. Can't afford to. My daughter is watching everything I do, learning what relationships look like by observing mine. If I'm going to show her anything, it's going to be truth. Rebecca's eyes were wet when she looked up at him. Then tell me the truth. Why did you say yes when I asked you to come today? Because you asked. Because 8 weeks of Tuesday and Thursday mornings showed me someone who was trying as hard as I was to be seen as human rather than useful. Because when you talked about your family and their expectations, I heard the same exhaustion I felt about a world that wanted to categorize and leverage me. Because Sophia drew you with sad eyes and then drew you smiling when we were together, and my daughter's observations are usually right. He paused, gathering courage. And because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to want something for myself instead of just surviving for Sophia's sake. That's terrifying and necessary in equal measure. Rebecca stepped closer, closing the last distance between them, and James felt his careful control fracture. He had spent 3 years since Sarah's death building walls, protecting himself and Sophia from the vulnerability that came with caring about people who might leave. But Rebecca was looking at him like he mattered, like his presence wasn't conditional on his usefulness, and he was so tired of maintaining defenses that served no purpose except isolation. Before he could talk himself out of it, he kissed her. Not tentatively or carefully, but with the accumulated want of 8 weeks spent pretending that Tuesday and Thursday mornings were just friendly conversations, rather than the slow building of something neither had been willing to name. Rebecca made a small sound against his mouth, surprise or relief or something in between, and then she was kissing him back with equal intensity. Her hands found his shoulders, his found her waist, and for a moment the complications dissolved into simple human need. Then Sophia's voice cut through the moment, sleepy but alert. "Daddy?" They broke apart, both breathing hard. James turned to find his daughter sitting up on the couch, rubbing her eyes. "I'm here, sweetheart. Are you kissing Miss Rebecca?" There was no judgment in the question, just curiosity. James crossed the room and knelt beside the couch, bringing himself to Sophia's eye level. "Yes, is that okay with you?" She considered this seriously, her small face scrunched in concentration. "Mommy used to say that kissing means caring about someone special. Do you care about Miss Rebecca special?" "I think I might, but I need to make sure you're okay with that first." Sophia looked past him to where Rebecca stood by the window, still catching her breath. "Miss Rebecca makes you smile more, and you make her not have sad eyes, so I think it's okay." She paused, then added with the devastating honesty of 6-year-olds, "But Mommy is still special too, right? You're not forgetting her? James felt his throat tighten, felt the familiar grief surge up and mix with the unfamiliar hope. Never, sweetheart. Mommy will always be special. Loving someone new doesn't mean forgetting someone you loved before. It just means your heart has room for both. Like how I love you and Grandma Sarah and Grandpa William all at the same time? Exactly like that. Sophia nodded, satisfied, and held out her arms. James gathered her up, feeling her slight weight settle against him, her heart monitor beeping its steady reassurance. Over her head, he met Rebecca's eyes and saw tears tracking down her face. I should get her home. It's late and she needs her proper bed. Rebecca moved toward them, hesitant. Can I see you? Tomorrow? Or whenever you're ready? Tuesday morning. Moonbeam Cafe, 7:45. Our usual time. Our usual time. They left through a side entrance, avoiding the reception still ongoing in the main hall. The valet brought James's 12-year-old sedan around, and if he was surprised to see guests leaving in something so modest, he hid it well. James buckled Sophia into her booster seat, checked that her heart monitor was properly positioned, and slid behind the wheel. As they drove away from the Mitchell estate, Sophia's voice drifted up from the back seat, drowsy but determined. Daddy, did we have an adventure today? We did, sweetheart. Good. Mommy always said adventures were important, even scary ones. Especially scary ones. The drive back to Portland took 90 minutes through darkness, broken only by headlights and the occasional gas station. Sophia fell asleep within 10 minutes, her breathing deep and even. James drove carefully, his mind replaying the evening's events. Michael Thompson's kneeling, Stephen Harris's implications, Patricia Mitchell's public apology, Rebecca's kiss. He thought about the drawing Sophia had made, the three purple figures holding hands, and wondered if his daughter's vision of their future was prescient or simply hopeful. He thought about Sarah, about the promise he had made to her in the hospital 3 days before she died. That he would raise their daughter to be brave and kind, that he would show her what love looked like even when it was complicated, that he wouldn't hide from life just because life had taken Sarah away. He was trying to keep that promise, but trying and succeeding weren't the same thing, and he wouldn't know which one he was doing until much later, when Sophia was old enough to look back and judge whether her father had been courageous or cowardly in the choices he made. They reached the apartment building at 11:30. James carried Sophia upstairs, her dead weight in his arms a familiar burden. He changed her into pajamas without fully waking her, checked her heart monitor one final time, and tucked her into bed with the stuffed elephant Sarah had given her on her 3rd birthday. In his own room, James sat on the edge of his bed and let the exhaustion wash over him. His phone buzzed with a text message. Rebecca, thank you for today, for all of it. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts. He typed back, Tuesday morning, we'll figure out what comes next. I don't want this to be an act. It isn't. It won't be. I don't know how to do fake. Good. Neither do I. Not anymore. He set the phone aside and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The evening had rewritten something fundamental, had taken what might have remained a casual friendship and transformed it into something with stakes and consequences. Patricia Mitchell's public validation meant Rebecca's family would be watching, judging, measuring whether James was worthy of their daughter's attention. Stephen Harris and others like him would be calculating how to leverage connection to James for their own advantage. And somewhere in the mix of all that external pressure existed the actual relationship. The real thing between two people who had found each other in a cafe and decided to risk being seen. James thought about what he had told Sophia, about how loving someone new didn't mean forgetting someone you loved before. He hoped that was true. He hoped Sarah would understand that he was trying to move forward while honoring what they had built together. He hoped Sophia would grow up seeing that grief and joy could coexist, that healing didn't require erasing the past. But hoping and knowing were different things entirely, and all he could do was show up on Tuesday morning and see whether what had started in a quiet cafe could survive the weight of family expectations and public scrutiny. He fell asleep with that uncertainty, with the memory of Rebecca's kiss, with Sophia's drawing of 3 purple figures, and with Sarah's voice in his memory reminding him that the only adventures worth having were the ones that scared you just enough to prove you were still alive. Tuesday morning arrived wrapped in Portland drizzle, the kind of persistent rain that turned the city soft around its edges. James stood outside Moonbeam Cafe at 7:43, 2 minutes early as always, watching water streak down the windows and blur the warm light inside. Sophia was at school, dropped off with a kiss and a promise that he would pick her up at 3:15 sharp. His morning was his own for the first time since the wedding 3 days ago. Rebecca was already inside, sitting at their usual table with 2 cups of black coffee steaming between her hands. She saw him through the glass and something in her expression shifted. Relief mixed with apprehension, like someone who had spent the intervening days wondering if what happened at the Mitchell estate would survive the return to ordinary life. He pushed through the door, shaking rain from his jacket, and crossed to her without hesitation. She stood as he approached, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, taking inventory of whether Saturday night had changed things beyond repair or opened something neither had expected. "You came. I said I would. I know. But I spent the last 3 days wondering if you'd reconsider, if my family scared you off, if the complications outweighed whatever this is." James sat down and wrapped his hands around the coffee she had ordered for him, exactly the way he liked it, even though he had never explicitly told her his preferences. She had observed and remembered which counted for more than grand gestures. "I don't scare easily, and complications are just problems that haven't been solved yet." Rebecca smiled, the tension in her shoulders easing fractionally. "My mother called yesterday, wanted to know if I was pursuing something serious with you." Her exact words. "What did you tell her?" "That it wasn't her business, that I'm 40 years old and capable of making my own decisions about who I spend time with. That her approval, while appreciated, isn't required." How did she take that? "About as well as you'd expect. She reminded me that as CEO of a family company, my personal life reflects on the business. That the board watches everything I do, that scandal or impropriety could impact shareholder confidence." Rebecca's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "She stopped just short of calling you a liability." James felt the words land but refused to let them penetrate. He had been called worse by better people, and Patricia Mitchell's concerns about shareholder confidence meant nothing compared to the question of whether what he and Rebecca were building had substance beneath the surface attraction. "Do you think I'm a liability?" "No, but I think other people will. Stephen Harris has already been making noise about conflicts of interest, suggesting that any consulting work you might do for Mitchell Enterprises would be tainted by our relationship. He's positioning himself as the defender of corporate integrity while conveniently ignoring that his real concern is personal jealousy. I haven't done any consulting work for Mitchell Enterprises, don't plan to. That won't stop the speculation, or the whispers, or the careful suggestions from board members that perhaps the CEO should be more mindful of appearances." James leaned back in his chair, studying Rebecca's face. She looked tired, shadows beneath her eyes suggesting sleep had been elusive since Saturday. He recognized the expression from his own mirror, someone carrying weight they hadn't asked for but couldn't set down. "Are you asking me to step back? To make this easier for you politically?" "No, I'm asking if you're prepared for what comes next. Because this isn't just coffee at a cafe anymore. This is public. People are watching. And some of those people will use whatever ammunition they can find to undermine either your credibility or mine. I've been undermined before, survived it. Not like this. Not with the resources and reach that come with attacking someone connected to a billion-dollar company." James let the silence stretch between them, weighing his next words carefully. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the cafe's windows like impatient fingers. The barista moved behind the counter with practiced efficiency, ignoring their conversation with the studied indifference of someone who had overheard countless private moments and learned not to intrude. When Sarah was dying, the oncologist told me I had two choices. I could spend her last months trying to protect her from the reality of what was happening. Or I could be honest and let her make her own decisions about how she wanted to use the time she had left. I chose honesty. It was harder, messier, more painful. But it meant when she died, we had no regrets about things left unsaid. He met Rebecca's eyes. I can't do fake. Can't pretend that complications don't exist or that other people's judgments don't matter. But I can be honest about what I want and let you decide if that's something you want too. And what I want is to see where this goes without letting your board or Stephen Harris or your mother determine the outcome before we've had a chance to figure it out ourselves. Rebecca reached across the table and took his hand, her grip firm despite the tremor he felt in her fingers. Then we figure it out, together. And if that means dealing with Stephen's insinuations and my mother's concerns and board members who think I'm compromising my position, then that's what we deal with. They sat like that for several minutes, hands linked across the table while around them the cafe filled with its usual Tuesday morning regulars. Students with laptops and textbooks, retirees reading newspapers, young professionals grabbing coffee before heading to offices downtown. Normal people living normal lives, blissfully unaware that at table 4, two people were negotiating whether to risk everything for the possibility of something real. James's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it initially, but it buzzed again, insistent. He released Rebecca's hand and checked the screen. 2 missed calls from Sophia's school. His heart rate spiked immediately. I need to take this. He stepped outside into the rain, dialing the school's number with hands that had gone unsteady. The receptionist answered on the first ring. Mr. Robinson, we've been trying to reach you. Sophia had an episode during music class. Her heart rate became irregular and she complained of chest pain. The school nurse administered her emergency medication and called an ambulance. They're transporting her to Providence Portland Medical Center now. The world narrowed to a tunnel. James heard himself asking questions. What triggered it? How long had it lasted? Was she conscious? But the answers were static beneath the roar of his pulse. Sophia. Hospital. Emergency. He was running before he fully registered the decision, rain soaking through his jacket within seconds. Rebecca appeared beside him, her hand on his arm. What happened? Sophia. Heart episode. They're taking her to Providence. I'm driving. My car is faster. She was right. His sedan was parked 3 blocks away. Her Mercedes sat in the cafe's small lot, and she was already pulling out her keys, already moving toward it with the kind of decisive action that probably made her effective in boardrooms. James followed, his mind cycling through worst-case scenarios he had trained himself not to indulge but which flooded in anyway during moments like this. The drive to Providence took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Rebecca navigated traffic with aggressive precision, running yellow lights and exploiting gaps that James would never have attempted. She didn't try to fill the silence with false reassurance or meaningless platitudes. She just drove, her jaw set and her focus absolute. They reached the emergency department and James was out of the car before it fully stopped, sprinting through automatic doors into the controlled chaos of a level 1 trauma center. The intake nurse recognized the panic in his face and pulled up Sophia's information without making him wait. Robinson, 6 years old, cardiac event. She's in Bay 7. Dr. Chen is with her now. Bay 7 was behind a curtain that offered the illusion of privacy. James pushed through and found his daughter on a gurney, hooked to monitors that beeped with rhythms he had learned to interpret over 6 years of managing her condition. Her eyes were open, tracking movement, which meant she was conscious and oriented. Relief hit him so hard his knees nearly buckled. "Daddy." Her voice was small but steady. He crossed to her side and took her hand, careful not to disturb the IV line running into her other arm. "I'm here, sweetheart. You're okay. You're going to be okay." The doctor, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and efficient movements, looked up from the monitor she was reviewing. "Mr. Robinson, I'm Dr. Chen, pediatric cardiology. Sophia experienced what we call a supraventricular tachycardia event. Her heart rate spiked to 180 beats per minute, which triggered the chest pain and dizziness. We've administered adenosine to reset her rhythm, and she's stabilized now." "What caused it?" "Could be several factors: stress, lack of sleep, dehydration. Sometimes there's no clear trigger. Her baseline murmur makes her more susceptible to these episodes, but they're generally not life-threatening if treated promptly." James felt the medical terminology wash over him, familiar from previous scares but still terrifying in its implications. Sophia's condition was manageable until it wasn't, stable until it destabilized. The uncertainty was the hardest part, the knowledge that at any moment her heart could betray her. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, having parked the car, and found her way through the hospital's maze. She stopped when she saw Sophia, her face going pale. "Is she? She's stable. They got her rhythm back to normal." Rebecca moved closer, hesitant, like she was afraid her presence might be an intrusion. Sophia noticed her and managed a small smile. "Miss Rebecca, did you come because I was sick? I came because your daddy needed to get here fast, and my car is faster than his. Are you going to stay?" Rebecca glanced at James, seeking permission. He nodded, grateful for the support, even as part of him wanted to handle this alone the way he had handled every medical crisis for the past 3 years. Dr. Chen continued her explanation, detailing the need for observation, possible medication adjustments, follow-up with Sophia's regular cardiologist. James absorbed the information mechanically, his focus split between his daughter's face and the monitors tracking her vitals. They moved Sophia to a pediatric observation room 2 hours later, a space designed to be less intimidating than standard hospital rooms. The walls were painted with cartoon characters, the linens featured cheerful patterns, and the TV offered streaming services instead of just basic cable. Sophia settled into the bed with the resignation of a child who had spent too much time in hospitals. "How long do I have to stay, Daddy?" "At least overnight, maybe longer depending on what your tests show." "Will you stay with me?" "Every minute." Rebecca had disappeared briefly and now returned with coffee and sandwiches from the hospital cafeteria. She handed James a cup and set the food on the bedside table. "Thought you might need this." "Thank you." They sat on opposite sides of Sophia's bed, maintaining a vigil that felt both intimate and strange. James found himself acutely aware of Rebecca's presence, of how she had shifted without hesitation from romantic interest to support system, how she hadn't asked if he needed help but simply provided it. Sophia drifted in and out of sleep, aided by medications designed to keep her calm and comfortable. During one of her waking periods, she looked at Rebecca with those two observant eyes. "You didn't have to stay. Daddy and I are used to hospitals." "I know, but I wanted to stay anyway." "Why?" "Because people who care about each other show up when things are hard, not just when they're easy." Sophia considered this, then reached for Rebecca's hand. "Mommy used to say that too. That real love is what you do when everything is broken." Rebecca's eyes filled and she blinked rapidly to clear them. "Your mommy was very wise. Daddy says I'm wise like her. Do you think that's true?" "I think it's absolutely true." Sophia smiled, satisfied, and closed her eyes again. James watched the exchange and felt something shift in his chest, some final resistance giving way. Rebecca wasn't performing. She wasn't here for appearances or because dating a single father required tolerating his daughter's medical emergencies. She was here because she had chosen to be, and that choice mattered more than any declaration of intent. Evening came, turning the windows into mirrors that reflected the hospital room's artificial light. James convinced Rebecca to go home around 8, promising to call if anything changed. She left reluctantly, extracting a promise that he would text updates throughout the night. Alone with Sophia, James settled into the reclining chair the hospital provided for parents and tried to find a position that wouldn't leave him completely destroyed by morning. Sophia's breathing had evened out, her heart monitor showing rhythms that fell within acceptable parameters. She would be fine. This episode would join the catalog of other episodes, scary in the moment but manageable in retrospect. His phone buzzed, a text from Rebecca. "How is she?" "Sleeping, stable. Thank you for today." "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do. You showed up when you didn't have to. That matters. I'll always show up. When things are broken, when they're whole, whenever." James read the message 3 times, absorbing the commitment embedded in those words. Then he set his phone aside and let himself sleep, trusting the monitors to wake him if Sophia needed him. Wednesday morning brought Dr. Chen's discharge orders along with modifications to Sophia's medication regimen and strict instructions about monitoring stress levels. James signed paperwork, collected prescriptions, and bundled his daughter into a wheelchair for the mandatory ride to the hospital's exit. Rebecca was waiting in the pickup zone, having somehow intuited when they would be released. She helped Sophia into the back seat with a gentleness that spoke of practice, though James didn't know where that practice had come from. They drove to his apartment in silence, Sophia dozing against the window. Rebecca pulled into a guest parking spot and turned off the engine. "I should go. Let you both rest. You could come up if you want." It was the first time he had invited her into his actual life, beyond cafes and weddings and hospital waiting rooms. She understood the significance because she hesitated, weighing what accepting meant. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." The apartment was modest in ways that probably shocked someone accustomed to the Mitchell estate's grandeur. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with appliances from the previous decade. The furniture was functional rather than decorative, purchased from estate sales and second-hand stores. The walls held Sophia's artwork and family photos, but little else. It was clean and organized, but unmistakably the home of someone who budgeted carefully and prioritized function over form. Rebecca stood in the living room taking inventory without judgment. "It's nice. Feels lived in." That's one way to describe it. "I meant it as a compliment. My condo is all glass and steel and designer furniture that looks beautiful but feels like a hotel. This feels like people actually live here." James got Sophia settled in her room with her favorite stuffed elephant and a promise that he would check on her every 30 minutes. When he returned to the living room, he found Rebecca examining the photos on the bookshelf. She had stopped in front of one showing James, Sarah, and baby Sophia at what looked like a park picnic. "She's beautiful." "Sarah." She was. Sophia has her eyes, and her ability to see through people's pretenses. Sarah could read a room in 30 seconds and identify exactly who was genuine and who was performing. He moved to stand beside Rebecca, looking at the photo with the complicated mixture of love and loss that 3 years hadn't diminished. "She would have liked you. Probably would have seen through your CEO armor within 5 minutes and found the person underneath. Would she have approved of you moving on?" James picked up the photo, holding it carefully. 3 days before she died, Sarah made me promise something. She said I had to keep living after she was gone, not just existing or surviving, but actually living, building a life that had room for joy and connection and all the messy complications that make it worth doing. She said if I turned into one of those widowers who freeze themselves in grief and refuse to let anyone close, she would haunt me. He set the photo back down. So yes, she would approve, because she knew that loving her didn't mean I was incapable of loving anyone else. It just meant I understood what real love looked like and wouldn't settle for anything less. Rebecca turned to face him fully, her professional composure completely absent. I don't know how to do this, any of this. I've spent 8 years building walls and convincing myself that being alone was safer than risking another relationship that might fall apart. And then you walked into Moonbeam Cafe looking like you understood exactly what I was running from. And suddenly alone felt like giving up instead of protecting myself. So don't give up. Don't protect yourself into isolation. Risk it. Risk me. Risk us. What if I mess it up? What if I'm too damaged or too controlling or too afraid? James closed the distance between them and took her hands, feeling the tremor that suggested her vulnerability was costing her everything. Then we'll deal with it. We'll fight about it. We'll figure it out or we won't, but at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have chosen courage over comfort. He paused, letting the words settle. Caring looks different from controlling, Rebecca, and you're allowed to care without needing to manage every outcome. She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, like someone who had been holding her breath underwater and finally surfaced. James responded in kind, his hands finding her waist, pulling her closer, letting 3 days of worry and fear and hope translate into physical connection. They broke apart when Sophia's voice called from the bedroom asking for water. James pressed his forehead to Rebecca's, breathing hard. Hold that thought. He brought Sophia her water, checked her monitor, smoothed her hair back from her forehead. When he returned to the living room, Rebecca was gathering her things. I should go. Let you focus on Sophia. You don't have to leave. I know, but I think I need to. Need to process everything that's happened in the last 3 days. Need to figure out what I'm actually willing to risk versus what I'm just saying I'll risk. James walked her to the door, not arguing because he understood the need for space to think clearly. Tuesday morning, same time. Same time. She left and James stood at the window watching her Mercedes pull out of the parking lot. Behind him, Sophia appeared in her pajamas, her heart monitor visible beneath her shirt. Is Miss Rebecca your girlfriend now? I think maybe she is. How do you feel about that? Sophia climbed onto the couch and patted the cushion beside her. James sat and she leaned against him with the comfortable weight of a child who had never doubted her father's love. I feel okay. She makes you happy and she was nice at the hospital even though hospitals are scary. They are scary, but less scary when people you love are there with you. James wrapped his arm around his daughter and held her carefully, acutely aware of the fragile heart beating beneath her ribs, the medical condition that could take her from him without warning, the preciousness of every moment they had together. You're very wise, sweetheart. I know. Mommy told me before she died that I needed to be wise for both of us. So I pay attention and remember things and try to understand what people mean instead of just what they say. The next week unfolded with the rhythm of ordinary life. James worked from home, keeping Sophia close as she recovered. Rebecca texted daily, sharing updates about board meetings and Stephen Harris's continued maneuvering. She came over twice for dinner, bringing takeout that Sophia approved and conversation that felt easier each time. On Monday, 12 days after the wedding, Rebecca called James at work with urgency threading through her voice. Stephen called an emergency board meeting. He's presenting a motion to establish new conflict of interest policies. Says it's about corporate governance, but it's obviously targeted at you, at us. What kind of policies? Prohibiting the company from engaging consultants who have personal relationships with executive leadership. It's vague enough to sound reasonable while being specific enough to prevent me from ever hiring you even if you wanted to be hired. I don't want to be hired. That's not the point. The point is he's trying to use board policy to control my personal life, to make you a liability that I have to choose between keeping or protecting my position. James leaned back in his office chair. watching rain streak down the window overlooking downtown Portland. "When's the meeting?" "Thursday, 2 p.m. I'll be there." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. If Stephen is going to use me as ammunition against you, then I should at least be present to defend myself. To defend us." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried something James recognized as hope. "You'd really show up to a board meeting? Face down 15 people who are going to scrutinize everything about you? I'd show up to a lot worse than that if it meant we get to keep choosing this without other people determining the outcome." Thursday arrived faster than James wanted. He arranged for Sophia to stay with Sarah's parents, the first time he had left her with them since the hospital incident. They understood the stakes, had watched James rebuild his life after their daughter's death, and were cautiously optimistic about Rebecca's presence in his world. Mitchell Enterprises occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in Portland's Pearl District. James had been in buildings like this for client meetings, but never as the subject of discussion. He wore his interview suit, the one marginally nicer than his Sunday suit, and carried a folder containing documentation he hoped he wouldn't need. Rebecca met him in the lobby, professional armor fully deployed. Her suit probably cost more than his monthly rent. Her hair pulled back in a style that emphasized her cheekbones, her expression controlled in a way that suggested she had spent the morning preparing for battle. "Thank you for coming. Where else would I be?" They rode the elevator in silence, surrounded by other professionals heading to their own meetings and conflicts. On the 15th floor, Rebecca led him through a maze of cubicles and offices to a conference room dominated by a table that could seat 20 people. 14 board members were already present, their conversations dying as James entered. He recognized Patricia Mitchell and Stephen Harris immediately. The others were strangers whose nameplates identified them as representatives of investment firms, family trusts, and strategic partners. Patricia nodded to James, her expression neutral. Stephen smiled with all the warmth of a shark scenting blood. "Mr. Robinson, how good of you to join us. I wasn't aware this was a public meeting." Rebecca took her seat at the head of the table, gesturing for James to sit beside her. "Mr. Robinson is here at my invitation. Since the proposed policy changes directly reference relationships between executive leadership and outside consultants, I thought it appropriate for him to hear the discussion firsthand." Stephen's smile tightened. "Of course, transparency is important." The meeting began with procedural matters, approval of previous minutes, financial reports, routine business. James listened without speaking, taking the measure of the room. Most board members seemed uncomfortable with his presence, though whether from genuine concern about propriety or simple awkwardness was hard to determine. Patricia watched him with the same assessing gaze she had employed at the wedding, neither hostile nor welcoming. Then Stephen moved to introduce his policy proposal, and the temperature in the room dropped several degrees. "Recent events have highlighted potential vulnerabilities in our governance structure. Specifically, situations where personal relationships between executive leadership and outside parties could create conflicts of interest or the appearance of impropriety." He distributed copies of his proposed policy, a 3-page document that James skimmed quickly. The language was careful, legalistic, designed to sound like reasonable corporate governance while being specifically calibrated to make Rebecca's relationship with him problematic. This policy would require board approval for any consulting engagement with individuals who have personal relationships with C-suite executives. It would also mandate disclosure of such relationships and potential recusal from decisions involving those individuals. One of the investment firm representatives spoke up, a man in his 60s whose nameplate read Harrison. "What constitutes a personal relationship in this context? Family members, romantic partners, close friends, anyone whose connection to executive leadership might compromise objective judgment." Patricia leaned forward. "Stephen, let's dispense with the pretense. This policy is specifically designed to address my daughter's relationship with Mr. Robinson. If you have concerns about that relationship, state them directly rather than hiding behind corporate governance language. Stephen had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable before doubling down. Fine. Yes, I have concerns. Our CEO is involved with someone who, by his own admission, has helped numerous companies navigate financial difficulties. What's to prevent him from gaining access to proprietary information through that relationship? What's to prevent future accusations of insider trading or corporate espionage? James felt Rebecca tense beside him, saw her preparing to defend him. He placed a hand on her arm, a gentle request for permission to speak. She nodded. May I address that directly? Stephen gestured magnanimously. Please, I'm interested in hearing your perspective. James stood not because it was necessary, but because he wanted the physical presence, the visible reminder that he was a person rather than an abstract concern. My name is James Robinson. I'm 38 years old, a widower, and the father of a 6-year-old daughter with a heart condition. I work as a financial analyst for Morgan Cross Financial, where I've been employed for 7 years. My annual income is $87,000 before taxes. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in southeast Portland, drive a 12-year-old sedan, and budget carefully to ensure my daughter's medical needs don't force us into debt. He pulled several documents from his folder and distributed them around the table. These are my tax returns for the past 5 years. These are bank statements showing I have no unusual deposits or income sources. This is a letter from my employer confirming that I have no consulting practice outside my regular employment and have signed confidentiality agreements that prohibit me from sharing proprietary client information. The board members examined the documents with varying degrees of interest. Harrison looked impressed. Patricia remained neutral. Stephen's jaw tightened. I met Rebecca Mitchell 2 months ago at a cafe in Portland. I had no idea who she was beyond someone who also seemed to value quiet mornings and honest conversation. When she invited me to her sister's wedding, I researched her family and discovered the extent of your business empire. I chose to attend anyway because I value the friendship we had built and wanted to see if it could become something more. He returned to his seat but kept his attention on the board. I have never asked Rebecca for business opportunities, investment advice, or proprietary information. I have never sought to leverage our relationship for professional gain. In fact, I have turned down consulting offers from multiple people in your extended network, including Mr. Harris, specifically to avoid any appearance of conflict. Stephen leaned forward. How convenient that you have all this documentation prepared. Almost as if you anticipated this meeting. I anticipated that someone would question my motives eventually. Men who look like me, who come from where I come from, learn early that we'll be required to justify our presence in spaces we weren't born into. So yes, I prepared. Because I care about Rebecca enough to defend our relationship against insinuations that I'm here for the wrong reasons. Patricia spoke then, her voice cutting through the tension. Stephen, what exactly are you protecting the company from? Mr. Robinson hasn't been hired by us, hasn't sought employment, hasn't requested favors or access. Your policy addresses a problem that doesn't exist. It addresses a potential future problem. Prevention rather than reaction. No, it addresses your personal feelings about Rebecca's choice of partner, which is not board business. Stephen's face flushed. With all due respect, Patricia, the CEO's judgment is absolutely board business. If that judgment is compromised by romantic entanglement... James stood again, his voice level but carrying an edge that made several board members straighten in their seats. Let me be very clear about something. I don't need Mitchell Enterprises. I don't need access to your boardroom or your business strategies or your professional network. What I need is to raise my daughter with integrity, to show her that relationships are built on honesty rather than transaction, and to demonstrate that love doesn't require compromising your values or diminishing yourself to accommodate other people's insecurities. He looked directly at Stephen. You're not protecting this company from me. You're trying to punish Rebecca for rejecting you, for choosing someone who doesn't fit your criteria of appropriate. And you're using corporate policy as a weapon because direct confrontation would expose your actual motivation. The room went silent. Stephen's face had gone from flushed to pale, his hands gripping the table edge. That's a serious accusation. It's an accurate observation, and if you want to challenge it, I can provide evidence of your persistent attempts to pursue Rebecca despite her clear lack of interest. I can produce emails and text messages documenting your behavior over the past 2 years. Rebecca spoke quietly beside him. I never asked you to do this. I know, but I'm doing it anyway, because someone has to say what everyone in this room already knows but is too polite to acknowledge. Harrison cleared his throat, breaking the standoff. I move we table Stephen's policy proposal pending further review. This seems like a solution in search of a problem, and I'm not comfortable establishing precedent based on hypothetical concerns. I second that motion. The vote was 11-3, with only Stephen and 2 others supporting immediate adoption. The policy died before it could take effect, and with it, Stephen's attempt to use corporate governance as relationship control. The meeting adjourned shortly after. Board members filed out with varying expressions, some approving, some uncomfortable, all aware they had witnessed something more personal than professional. Patricia lingered as the room emptied, waiting until only she, Rebecca, and James remained. That was well played, Mr. Robinson. Dangerous, but well played. I wasn't playing. No, I suppose you weren't, which makes it more impressive. She gathered her materials and moved toward the door, then paused. My husband used to say that the difference between controlling and caring is whether you trust people to make their own mistakes. I've been controlling Rebecca for 5 years because I was afraid of losing her the way I lost Thomas. Afraid that if I wasn't vigilant, something would take her from me too. Her voice cracked slightly. But watching you defend her today reminded me that trust is how you show love to capable adults. So I'm going to try trusting my daughter's judgment, and if you hurt her, I won't need board policies to make your life difficult. Do we understand each other? Perfectly. Patricia nodded and left. James turned to find Rebecca watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Someone had to stand up and say that loving you isn't a corporate governance issue, that we get to choose this without needing approval from people who measure worth in quarterly earnings. Rebecca crossed to him and cupped his face in her hands. I love you. I don't know when it happened exactly, but somewhere between Tuesday morning coffee and watching you defend our relationship in front of 15 board members, I fell completely in love with you. James felt the words hit him like physical force, like something he had been bracing against suddenly giving way. Say it again. Look at me when you say it. She met his eyes, unflinching. I love you, James Robinson. I love your dignity and your competence and the way you show up when things are hard. I love how you parent Sophia and honor Sarah and refuse to compromise who you are to make other people comfortable. I love that you're brave enough to risk this even though neither of us knows how it ends. He kissed her there in the conference room, surrounded by the detritus of corporate power plays and professional posturing, and felt something fundamental settle into place. This was real. This was worth defending. This was the kind of love that Sarah had made him promise to keep looking for. When they broke apart, Rebecca was smiling through tears. What happens now? Now we go pick up my daughter from her grandparents, and tomorrow morning we have coffee at Moonbeam. And we figure out the rest as we go. That's not much of a plan. It's the only plan I've got, but it's built on honesty and choice and the recognition that we're both brave enough to keep choosing each other. That's more than most people have. Rebecca took his hand, their fingers intertwining. Then let's go get Sophia. They left Mitchell Enterprises together. walking out of the glass tower into Portland drizzle that turned the city soft around its edges, toward a future neither had planned but both were willing to build.